74. The emperor conquered Poland and did everything to enforce the obedience of the people there. While convoy of chained rebels made their way towards the snows of Siberia, a flood of policemen, professors and minor functionaries was let loose over the countryside, their mission to keep watch over the Poles, to wear down their religion, suppress suspicious books and newspapers, and abolish the use of the national language little by little in order to kill the soul of the people. But in the other camp, resistance was quick to be organized. Disastrous experience had proved to the Poles that they had no chance of reconquering their liberty by force, at least for the moment. Their task was therefore to wait and to prevent their people from becoming cowardly or discouraged by the suppression. The battle therefore had changed ground. Its heroes were no longer warriors who died for their country. The new heroes were the intellectuals, priests, teachers, those upon whom the mind of the new generation depended. They suffered any humiliation rather than lose the place from which they could secretly influence and guide the Polish youths. Questions. What did the emperor do to suppress the Poles? B. How did he try to kill the souls of the people? C. How was resistance organized in the other camp? D. Who were the new heroes? E. What policy was adopted by them? 75. Writing is one of the most marvelous things ever invented by man. Indeed, our present civilization depends largely upon writing. But for it, the nations of the world would at their very moment know little about one another and would still be in a state of ignorance and semi-savagery. Page 707. Who was the creator of this marvelous invention? Some caveman, who likely a man in appearance, more like an ape, yet a man who was filled with a desire to make some lasting record of the strange things he saw about him. This man was also the world's first artist, for the first writing was picture writings, and took the form of pictures of the bear and stags and other animals which lived in the forests around the caveman's home. How do we know this, you may ask? The answer is that in certain parts of the world there are caves on the walls of which such pictures may be seen, drawn and painted many thousands of years ago. These ancient cavemen had minds like small children. Just as they drew pictures of things they saw in the world about them, so today, if you give a small child pencil and paper, he will draw pictures of homes and cows and men and women long before he learns to write. Questions. Why is writing considered one of the most marvelous inventions of man? B. Who invented it? C. Who was the first artist of the world? D. How do we know all this? 76. The Spartans were a strange people. Strange because they put honesty before cleverness, health before wealth, courage before cunning, and strength before all. They lived in the south of Greece over 20 centuries ago, but their fame is known throughout the West even today. This is because they wanted to be fine men and not rich men, because they wanted to do things and not to have things, and because they wanted what was good for mind, body and soul, and not what was pleasant. To this day we call a man a Spartan if we wish to say that he knows how to deny himself what he wants, that he is strong in character, and that he eats to live rather than lives to eat. The Spartans were better than the other Greeks because they had better aims. When the rest of the Greece was trying to get rich and to live in luxury and splendor, Sparta was trying to get strong and live in such a way as should be the very best for mind, body and soul. Question. Who were the Spartans? B. Why were they strange people? C. Why is their fame known even today? D. What kind of man is called a Spartan? E. What was the difference between the Spartans and other Greeks? 77. The city of Troy, having been captured by the Greeks, the conquerors, after the first excitement of plunder had abated, began to feel pity for the misfortunes of the vanquished, and caused a proclamation to be made that every free-born citizen should be permitted to take away with him any one thing which he valued the most. Upon this, Aeneas, the Trojan prince, surrendered everything else to have possession of his household gods. This conduct excited the minds of the Greeks so high an admiration for his piety that they gave him further leave to take away what he now valued most highly of all things that remained. Immediately he took upon his shoulders and carried out the burning town his aged father, who was so infirm as to be unable to escape without assistance. This evidence of filial affection raised still more highly the admiration of the victors, and they allowed him to take everything which he had possessed. They declared that it would be unnatural to them to be enemies to men who gave such proof of piety to the gods and dutiful attention to parents. Question. What was the proclamation made by the Greeks? B. What was the first choice of Aeneas? C. How did this affect the Greeks? D. What was Aeneas's second choice? E. What effect had this upon the Greeks? 78. Of all the amusements which can possibly be imagined for a hard-working man after his daily toils, there is nothing like an entertaining book. It relieves his home of its dullness. It takes him to a lovelier and more interesting scene. While he enjoys himself there, he may forget the evils of the present moment. Nay, it accompanies him to his day's work, and gives him something to think besides the drudgery of his everyday occupation. If I were to pray for a taste which should stand me in good stead under every variety of circumstances, and be a source of happiness and cheerfulness through life, it would be a taste for reading. Give a man this taste and the means of gratifying it, and you can hardly fail of making him a happy man, unless, indeed, you put into his hands most perverse selection of books. You place him in contact with the best society in every period of history, with the wisest, the tenderest, the bravest, and the purest characters which have adorned humanity. Questions. What is the best amusement for a hard-working man, and why is it so? B. How does it help him even in his work? What is the best taste to cultivate? D. How does this taste benefit him? Page 708. 79. Louis XIV, King of France, maintained one of the most elaborate courts in Europe, and lived more lavishly than any other monarch. There seemed to be no end of his wealth and good fortune. But of course there was an end. As the king revelled in luxury, his subjects begged for bread. The peasants were so heavily taxed that they had to live on the grass of the field and the leaves of trees. Their cattle were seized, and their grain was taken away by the field by the agents and soldiers of the king. France was shrouded in a black cloud of untold misery and despair. In his last days, Louis came to realize. He called for his 5-year-old grandson, who was to succeed him. "My child, you are going to be a great king," he said. Do not imitate me in my love of building and of war. Try always to be at peace with your neighbors. Render to God what is his due, and cause your subjects to honor him. Follow good advice and try to be a comfort to your people, which I unfortunately never have been. But Louis XV did not follow this advice, for he also paid more attention to his own comfort and happiness than to that of his people. Year after year he raised the taxes and made more cruel the punishment meted out to those who could not pay. Consequently, people came to hate him. When they saw him ride in his gold-trimmed carriage, drawn by the beautiful horses in jewel-studded harness, they turned from the familiar French greeting, "Long live the king," and cried, "Want, famine, bread." Question. What led France to untold misery and despair? B. What advice did Louis XIV give to his heir? C. How was the advice heeded, and what was the result? 80. People moan about poverty as a great evil, and it seems to be an accepted belief that if people had plenty of money, they would be happy and useful and get more out of life. But as a rule, there is more genuine satisfaction in life and more obtained from life in the humble cottage of the poor than in the places of rich. I always pity the sons and daughters of rich men who are attended by servants. It is because I know how sweet and pure the home of honest poverty is, how far from care and social envies and jealousies, how loving and united its members are in the common interest of supporting the family, that I congratulate the poor man's son. It is for these reasons that from the ranks of the poor so many strong, eminent, self-reliant men have always sprung and must spring. It seems to be a matter of universal desire that poverty should be abolished, but to abolish honest, industrious, self-denying poverty would be to destroy the soil upon which mankind produces the virtues that will enable our race to reach a still higher civilization that it now possesses. Question A. What do people generally think about poverty? B. What is the author's opinion of it? C. Why does the author prefer poverty to riches? D. Would you abolish poverty? If not, why not? 81. An old lady was walking down the middle of a street in a large city to the confusion of the traffic and with no small peril to herself. It was pointed out to her that the pavement was the place for foot passengers, but she replied, "I am going to walk where I like. We have got liberty now." It did not occur to the old lady, if liberty entitled the foot passengers to walk down the middle of the road, it also entitled the cab driver to drive on the pavement, and that the end of such liberty would be universal chaos. Everybody would be getting in every else's way and nobody would get anywhere. Individual liberty would become social anarchy. There is a danger of the society getting liberty drunk in these days, like the old lady, and it is just as well to remind ourselves what the rule of the road means. In order that the liberties of everybody may be preserved, the liberties of everybody must be curtailed. When a policeman steps into the middle of the road, put out his hand, he is a symbol not of tyranny, but of liberty. Questions. Why was the old lady walking down the middle of the street? What would have happened if the lady were allowed her way? B. Why does the author call the old lady liberty drunk? How should we use our liberties? E. What does the policeman symbolize? 82. Caravan dwelling is becoming popular in England. The caravan is a home which can be moved on wheels from one place to another and put up anywhere the owner likes after obtaining permission from the landlord and the local council. It came into vogue during the last war when houses were few and people did not know where to get shelter. Now it has become so popular that the number of caravans at present is believed to be more than 2 million. Page number 709. They are well furnished and whole families of parents and children live in them. If one caravan be not enough, two are attached to each other for greater accommodation. They are used by different persons for different purposes. There are large caravan sites near beauty spots and seaside for temporary accommodation for those who go there on holidays or weekends. Contractors' men find caravan better for their accommodation near the work sites than other shelter that the management could provide. There are others who simply use them as regular homes. Question. What are caravans? B. When and how did they come into vogue? C. How are they used by different people? 83. We cannot go through life without sorrow. There can be no sunshine without shade, no rose without its thorns. Our existence here is so complex that we must expect much sorrow and suffering. But although a good man may at times be angry with the world, it is certain that no man who did his duty in it was ever discontented with the world. The world is a looking glass. If you smile, it smiles. If you frown, it frowns back. If you look at it through a red glass, it seems red and rosy. If through a blue, all blue. If through a smoky one, all dull and dingy. Always try to look at the bright side of things. Almost everything has a bright side. There are some persons whose smile, the sound of whose voice, whose very presence seems like a ray of sunshine and brighten the whole room. While we should feel grateful and enjoy to the full innumerable blessings of life, we cannot expect to have no sorrow and anxieties. Question A. Why should we expect sorrow and suffering in life? B. Who is not discontented with the world? C. To what is the world like? What are the similarity? D. What should we always try to look at? 84. At the Bose Institute in Calcutta, the great experimenter himself was our guide. Through all an afternoon we followed him from marvel to marvel. We watched the growth of a plant being traced out automatically by a needle on a sheet of smoked glass. We saw its sudden shuddering reaction to an electric shock. We watched a plant feeding. In the process, it was exhaling minute quantities of oxygen. Each time the accumulation of exhaled oxygen reached a certain amount, a little bell, like the bell that warns you when you are nearly at the end of your line of typewriting, automatically rang. When the sun shone on the plant, the bell rang often and regularly. Shaded, the plant stopped feeding. The bell rang only at long intervals and not at all. A drop of stimulant added to the water in which the plant was standing set the bell wildly tinkling, as though something record-breaking typist were at the machine. Near it, for the plant was feeding out of doors, stood a large tree. Sir J. S. Bose told us that it had been brought to the garden from a distance. Transplantation is generally fatal to a full-grown tree. It dies of shock. So would most men if their arms and legs were amputated with an anesthesia. Bose administered chloroform. The operation was completely successful. Waking, the anesthetized tree immediately took root in its new place and flourished. Bose Institute, Aldous Huxley. Question. First, who was Sir J.C. Bose? 2. What is the name of the research center founded by him? 3. Did Huxley visit the institute alone? How do you know? 4. Who took him around? 5. What was the first experiment he saw? 6. What happened when the plant was given an electric shock? 7th. What indicated that the plant was not feeding? 85. The discovery that fire could be made of service to human beings is certainly of very great antiquity. In our own way, we have much respect and admiration for the great inventors. They are considered to be great men who have conferred priceless benefits on the human race. We should similarly admire the men who first made fire captive and showed how it could be used with safety and to man's advantage, not only to give warmth but to scare away wild beasts. At first, fire may have been obtained from blazing logs at the edge of a forest which had been set in flames by lightning. In time, men learned to keep a small fire burning so as to kindle other fires from it. Some savages in our own time keep smouldering logs in their villages, and when these are suddenly extinguished, they go in search of fire. Early man may have done the same. After fire came into use in ancient time, the next great discovery was how to produce it. It may be that busy flint workers sometimes used iron pyrites striking spark from flint. Then some men would have discovered that when he directed showers of sparks into dried grass and leaves, he could blow the smouldering parts into flame. 710 page number. Questions. A. How early was fire used by man? B. What should be our attitude towards the discovery of fire compared with our attitude to modern inventors? C. How did early men make use of fire? D. How was fire produced by them? 86. The word friars is a French one meaning brothers. They were monks given up to a religious life as brethren or members of certain orders called after the men who founded them. The order called Franciscans took its name from Saint Francis of Assisi, a town in Italy. The Franciscans worked for the poor in England. They were themselves bound by a vow to possess no money or house or land or other kind of wealth, to give up all the pleasure of the world and to pass their lives in tending the sick and teaching the ignorant poor. They went about the country with bare feet and clad in grey woolen robes, from which they were called Grey Friars. In the town, above all, these people were welcomed by the people. In those days there was far more sickness than now. People had fevers, and the dreadful disease known as leprosy was common in the crowded homes of the towns. The friars took up their abode in the meanest and poorest quarters of each town, and worked and nursed and taught amongst the people there. In fact, it was by the labours of these friars that the poor people of these towns were raised from the depth of ignorance, vice, and misery to a higher life. Question. Who were friars? What was the way the Franciscans had to take? Why were they called Grey Friars? Where and how did they work? What was the result of their work? 87. Though we have learned to be civilized about quarrels between persons, we have not yet earned to be equally civilized about quarrels between nations. Do nations settle their quarrels with the help of a judge? Sometimes they do so. That was the object of having a League of Nations or UNO. But sometimes they do not agree to let a judge decide. Then the only way to decide is by war. Is that a civilized way? We are struggling to be more civilized. None of us is perfect, and every uncivilized thing that we do Every selfish act we perform helps to bring suffering to our nation and to the whole world. On the other hand, every civilized thought that we think, every beautiful things we hope to make, every new discovery, every new noble deed helps to bring nearer the time when the world will be really civilized. A few hundred years ago, people living in different countries could behave badly without doing much harm to people in other countries. If there was a cruel king in one of the European countries, it did not matter how much to India or China, but it is no longer so. The new thinking has joined the whole world together. The ideas of some men in Germany or Japan set the whole world at war. A famine in Bengal made it necessary for wheat to be sent from Australia. As a famous American said, "We live in one world and not in scores of little separate worlds as in olden times." Questions A. How does the author show that the nation of the world are not yet fully civilized? B. How do we bring suffering to the world? C. What helps us in getting civilized? D. How does the new world differ from the old one? 88. You must often have heard people say, "It is not playing the game." Do you know exactly what they mean? They make this remark when someone does something which may be smart and clever, but which is not according to rules of decent living. Now games form an important part of our life and have an etiquette of their own. Firstly, you should play the game for the sake of the game. You should of course play as well as you can and play to win. If you lose, don't be depressed or make excuses or become bad-tempered. Be a sportsman. Admit that the other fellow was better than you. Congratulate him and leave it at that. If you win, don't brag about it. Thank your opponent for a good game and wish him better luck next time. You can show your sportsmanship just as much by the way you behave when a winner as by the way you can take a beating. One word more about the etiquettes of sports. At most games there is a crowd of spectators to watch the skill of the players. If they are to show their good manners and sportsmanship, they must accept the decision of the referee or umpire or judge. Question. What do you mean by playing the game in life? B. How should you accept victory or defeat in a game? C. How can the players and spectators show sportsmanship in a game? Page 711. 89. Persistent efforts are being made by nations to bring about a new social system in which all men would be provided at least the bare necessities of life, so that in a century or so there should be no poor men in the world. It is estimated that in the 18th century 80% of the people of England were poor. That is to say, they had no certain means of livelihood, could not afford 2 meals a day, or clothe themselves properly. Today the number of such people is very small, and even that small number is looked after by the state. Even in India, poverty is on the decrease, and its worst form, which resulted from famine, has been rooted out. There are canals to guide against uncertain rainfall. The means of transport have been developed to carry foodstuffs from one area to another when the crops fail. Nations are fighting against poverty by increased production. A scientific study of soils is undertaken to find out how they can make to yield richer crops. Manures made of chemicals are put into the fields to raise bumper crops. In the 16th century, an acre of land in England produced only 6 bushels of wheat a year. Under scientific cultivation, it yields more than 30. We also are trying it in India. Question. What is the ideal of the new social system? B. What changes has it affected in England? C. How has it worked in India? D. How are nations fighting against poverty? E. How has England benefited by scientific cultivation?